Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Laurin, and this week I'm interviewing Mike Trotter. He is also an elite trainer with First Form, and we've become great friends over the years, so I'm super excited to have him on the podcast today. And we're going to discuss the disconnect in the industry between coaches and clients and what we can do about it. So, hey, PT boss. I feel like I never would call you Mike. I always call you Trotter. And then a lot of people are definitely going to know you from your name at PT boss. And it's just funny. Like, if certain people have names that you're like, I'd never be like Mike.
I've looked at people like when I meet them randomly, they're like, wait, your name is Mike? Like, yeah, that's my actual name. Yep. Mom named me Mike. So
have you always gone by Trotter, or is that like a First Form thing because of Cunahan?
I think it's like a white people thing. Our white mates in college used to call me Trotter too. So maybe that's that. Can I say that on your podcast?
Okay. Yeah. Well, hey, there we go. We just answered it. It's a white people thing. Got it. We'll keep it moving.
College called me Trotter. My coaches called me Trotter. So it's all good. So
that's hilarious. All right. So brief background on you, on Mike Trotter, how you got started, how'd you get in the industry, and let's just go from there.
So for me, I didn't plan on doing this, right? It wasn't like I grew up wanting to be a coach, right? Like I played sports all my life. Basketball was my main thing. And long story short, I wasn't as good as I thought I was, right? But I think I needed to believe that I was good in order to do the college thing, because I wouldn't have gone to college without playing. In fact, I wouldn't have stayed in college if it wasn't for basketball, because I wasn't the academic person, right? I mean, I did what I had to do to stay eligible. Like, let's just be honest. And somehow along the way, I graduated with the exercise science degree. And
you're like, shit, how did that happen?
After I graduated, I was, so what?
You're like, how did that happen?
Yo, for real. I remember sitting at college graduation thinking like, shit, like what? Like, I can't believe this happened and what's next, right? So I was still pursuing the basketball thing after college. Like, I still wanted to play. But mind you, like looking back in retrospect, I didn't go to a big college, right? I wasn't even the best player on my college team, but I just had this thing like, I'm going to be the one to make it, right? Luckily, I was able to get invited to some overseas camps where I quickly got cut and quickly never got a call back. Instead of playing the sit by the phone and wait game for years, I decided, well, hey, I might as well use this degree, right? The cool thing is the summer that after I graduated and I was going to these camps, the coaches let me stay on campus to work out, right? And stay prepared and stay focused. And part of the deal of me doing that was like, okay, well, if you stay on campus to work out, then you have to work out our players, right? You have to put them through workouts too. So during that process, that's when I fell in love with training people. I realized I was pretty good at it at that point, and I decided to make something of it after that, right? I became a personal trainer, and I flourished very fast as a personal trainer. Like in the corporate setting, I got good quick. I entered this gym where there were a bunch of coaches already there established, and I quickly figured out, okay, if I'm going to pay my rent here, I have to figure out a way to stand out, And I learned that it wasn't really about who writes the best workout plans, which is what I want to talk to you about today as far as the disconnect goes. It was who provided the best experience, right? So I quickly identified who my clientele was and what their needs were. And once I did that, I quickly built a clientele, and one thing led to another. The corporate gym was then asking me to become the manager of the gym. And I did that, and we turned that company into the #1 training program in Central Illinois, right? So we're dominating shit. And I'm telling you the short story. Fast forward to now, it has a lot to do with, one, what I do as training coaches to become better coaches, because that was part of my role as the manager. I had 54 coaches that worked with me that I was responsible to develop them. And then I have my own clientele, so here we are, fast forward to now, that's what I do. My business is set up in two parts now. I have lifestyle clients, mostly beginners, busy people who want to create habits, even with their busy schedules, with their fitness goals. And then the other part of my business is I help coaches understand the psychology behind why people are going to work with them. And I'm so passionate about those two things. And like I told you on the phone yesterday, I'm just in a little bubble here of my own world where that's truly what I'm focused on every single day.
What would you say that you got out of in-person training that you now apply to online? Because you are exclusively online now, correct?
Yep.
So I think that a lot of people, previously, 5, 10, 15 years ago, certainly then, but even 5 years ago, had probably had some in-person experience, or were doing a blended model, right? Where a lot of people now who are starting to do online coaching have never really had in-person work or really any in-person experience, just kind of in general. And that's something that I had, at the very beginning of my career, not to the level that you did as far as managing all those people, but I loved that. I thrived off of that. And, everybody knows I'm super extroverted. I love being with people. So part of it's that. But I think that there was so much to learn from in-person experiences. What do you think that you got out of that you now use in the online setting?
I'm so grateful for my time as an in-person coach because it taught me everything, right? Like I said, I gave you the short version of the story just because I didn't want to take up all the time telling that long story. Truly, when I was trying to figure out my way, I'm like, okay, I have to write a better workout program than all of these guys here. And I have to write better meal plans than all of these guys in order to stand out. And I think it's important to sharpen your skills there. I'm not saying that's not important because it is. It's expected, right? But what I learned is that once I dove into, okay, who is it that buys personal training? For the most part, it was female, ages 28 to 50. Right. So what I did was I dove into, okay, who are these people outside of the gym? Because where I was messing up, the mistake I was making is the same mistake a lot of coaches make. We want them to love fitness the way we love fitness. Right. And the truth is they just don't. They'd rather be doing something else. If there was a pill that they could buy to lose the weight or build the muscle, trust me, they would. Right. So instead of fighting that battle, I'm like, okay, well, who is Miss Jones outside of the gym? And when I learned that their mothers, their wives, their business women, they're everything in between, it's like, okay, well, what is that demographic responsible for, right? And long story short, that demographic is responsible for everybody else, right? And since they are responsible for everybody else, they spend all their time when they're not at the gym doing everything for everybody else. Right. So I said, okay, I'm not going to be able to get Miss Jones to fall in love with working out. But what I can do is get her to fall in love with the experience, meaning nobody else is probably paying attention to her when she's outside of the gym. At least she feels that way. And through conversation, that's what I observed. Nobody was paying attention to her. So I did little things like, okay, when she got to the gym, instead of making her find me on the gym floor, like I noticed most trainers were doing, I would wait for her at the front desk, right? Because I realized the gym is a very intimidating experience for most people. So much so that people, if they didn't see their trainer when they got there, they would leave. So I would wait right there at the front desk with her. And during the workout, I would get the dumbbells for her and hand it to her. Take the dumbbells from her, put them away. When she walked to the water fountain, I wouldn't use that time to hang out with my trainer buddies. I would walk to the water fountain with her, give her a towel, wipe her sweat. So little things as far as providing experience that maybe she's not going to get, fall in love with these jumping jacks. But what she is going to fall in love with is how she feels when she's here. And as long as I can keep her coming back, she's going to naturally get a result. Once she starts getting the result, now she's addicted to the whole experience as a whole, and she wants to continue to come back. So that's what I learned from the in-person thing. It was like, okay, this business is truly about people. Once you make it about them, what naturally happens is eventually you succeed too. So that's how I passed everybody up at the gym and became month one, I was literally the top trainer at the gym. And it wasn't because I was doing some magical workout plan. It was simply because I decided to pay attention to people and go above and beyond their expectations from an experience standpoint.
And that's really what coaching or training is, right? And especially when we're talking about an in-person setting, it's often a lot, I don't want to say easier, but it can be easier to cultivate that. Where people really struggle, I feel like, is that online aspect, right? Because it's either like, hey, this is very transactional, or here's your spreadsheet, here's your numbers, here's that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's obviously, again, like it is a prerequisite to have a good program, but you don't have to be somebody who is, creating something that's like this whole new thing. Often, like, we look at those people and we're like, oh my gosh, I wish I could have discovered this or done that or be known for this. And it's like, okay, maybe you are known for one of or two of these things, but most people like just need help. You know what I mean? And there's so many different ways that we can achieve this and actually help them, and focusing on the person as an individual and not just as another number and not just as a spreadsheet, whether you're in person or online, is what's going to make a difference. Now, obviously, like, I do think that in person you have a leg up there because you can show, through your body language and your words and your actions a little bit easier, right?
Yep.
Obviously online that can be harder, but you can learn how to do that with the right tools and changing the way that you communicate, right? Whether it's typing or audio or video or both or whatever it is that you're choosing to do, there are certainly ways to accommodate that. And that's something that does take time to develop. Like, developing your voice online is something that's going to take time, but it is possible. And I would just say, for anybody listening, which, we're going to get into the actual topic soon, which this is a good segue, but I think that if you are interested in learning more about people, doing things in person is always going to be the best way to do that. And if you have the experience or the opportunity to have that experience, I would certainly go for it, even if it's a small capacity. And it's something that can look different for everybody, right? And I know a lot of people who do blended models still. And, I've talked to a lot of people in the industry who have been around for a while, and we're kind of all in the same thought that a lot of it is going to go back in person at some point, because everything moves online, and I do think that there is this very big need and desire to be in person, not just because of, because it's going to be better necessarily, but because of that human interaction, right? And people are really, really craving that and want that. So I do think that we're going to see a resurgence of that, because I think people think that personal training in person is like this like dead industry. And I don't think that that's true at all. Like, at all.
What I learned through everything that's happened lately, like, it might sound a bit much for me to put it this way, but our industry will never die. There will always be a need for what we do. We can't run from the opportunity though, right? Because you said it perfectly. There's such a strong need right now for human interaction. And as coaches, even online, we got to figure out a way to provide that as best as we can by doing things like we're doing right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's the difference. The coaches that you name where you say, well, yeah, they write the program and, that's it. That is it if that's the expectation going into it, right? But what plays into my advantage so much now, based off the things I've learned from in person, and I try to apply those online, is when I'm on that initial FaceTime call with a person that I'm not working with yet, I'm determining if we're going to be together or not, right? One of the main things I hear is the coach wrote me a plan and I never heard from that coach again. So the fact that we're not—
How are we still hearing this? Like, I'm just like, who are these? And this happens. This is so common. I literally just had a phone call with somebody. Sorry to cut you off. Yesterday or 2 days ago, they said the same thing. Not hearing back from my coach for, 2 weeks at a time, just radio silence. And I'm like,
yeah, it happens. It happens because it's nothing to call yourself a coach. So that's why when somebody who's so passionate about it, like you or I, when we see this, it's like, well, who are these people? Well, it's the person who woke up today and decided I'm going to do that, right? And because they have the following or the influence or whatever it may be, people give them a chance to do it. I don't look at our market as a saturated market, though. I look at it as if there are a lot of people doing it, but because there are a lot of people doing it that way, when the consumer gets to experience somebody who actually cares, right? We have the advantage before we even start the workout process because they already know how much we give it down.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to change the industry. I think that there are good things that have been happening, right? I'm always trying to be positive in that sense, but there is definitely still, like you said it perfectly, there's always going to be a need for this in some capacity. Because even if somebody knows, and this is something that I for sure misunderstood early on in my career. I always thought, well, it's a lack of information, or we need more information, or this, that, whatever. And people do at some point, they do need more information. They do need a more baseline knowledge. They do need expertise and more like advanced topics, for sure. Like all of that is true, but that's not the reason why people are not succeeding. You know what I mean? And even people who come to me or you or whatever might have a pretty good understanding, or they know enough, right? They know enough to do this on their own. But the real reason that they're seeking out coaching is accountability, is some more direction. And to be honest, both of us work with people who are really busy. Like they're just like, I don't want to think about this. I just want somebody to tell me this. And I used to think, oh, well, I don't want to just tell you what to do, because that's not teaching you anything. And to some degree, right? It's not just like, do this because I said so and shut up and don't ask me anything. That's of course inappropriate. Yeah. But sometimes people just want to be told like, hey, what do I do next? And like, why am I going to look at that in a negative way? And I used to be very like, oh no, that's terrible. You don't want to spoon feed a client, because then they're gonna. And there is, of course, there's extremes on each end, right? But it's something that I recognize. Like, no, and maybe that's just with different types of people that I'm working with now, or just my own growth and experience. You recognize like, no, I kind of want that too, right? And like you said, not everybody's as excited about this. Like yesterday, I met with my financial advisor, and we're going over stuff. Do you have any questions? And I'm like, y'all tell me. Like, this is not my field of interest. I don't look at this outside of our yearly review, because I will legit have a panic attack and take all my money out of the stock market and put it in my mattress. Like, what I'm saying? Like, so I don't do all that. But like, this is not my area of interest or expertise, and I have zero desire for it to be. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But there are certain things in my life that I'm like, I am going to outsource to people who know more and have dedicated their life and their craft to being good at this, right? And so it's like, that's the same thing that some clients are seeking from us. Other clients are not. Other clients are like, no, I want to learn all these nitty gritty details and do this on my own at one point. And I love working with those clients as well. But I think that it's about offering a full spectrum of services depending on the individual, and not being so closed-minded, I guess, is maybe where I was faulted before. And to think, oh, we need to do this one way or not. Like, no, some people, there's something wrong with saying, hey, here's this plan, do it. And there you go. Like,
that's one thing that we go over with the coaches that I coach. It's like, one, read the room, and then meet the person where they are and help them get to where it is that they want to be, right? Because I can go in with everything that I'm passionate about and use all the big words and use all the fancy stuff. And if it's going right over her head because she doesn't care about that, then guess what? She's not going to be able to adhere to the program, right? So for me, I take a very simple approach. It's not about me. How can I help you? And what I've learned, that approach, it evolves. Maybe she started out as somebody who just wanted me to do it for her. But then the more she falls in love with the process, based off of everything I said earlier, now she wants to know more, right? And it just depends. So I think as coaches, it is about reading the room, meeting the person where they are, and then helping them get to wherever it is that they want to be. And that's that, because I'm not going to fight. I've already got to fight you to get you to do the stuff most of the time. So now I'm not going to say this is the only way, because now we got to fight about that, so I pick my battles, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it's important to do that in a stepwise pattern. And that's something like, if we look at all the behavior change literature, it is very, very clear that people are only going to change and do things when they're ready, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't force anybody really to do anything. And we see this all the time. And this is something that I've had to let go of personally. It's, professionally and personally. Like sometimes it's like somebody doesn't want to make this change or want to do this. I am not in control of that. Yep. And I could guide them, right? I could say it 100 times, 100 different ways, this, that, whatever. Ultimately, they have to want to do that. And of course, we can still try to find different ways to adjust it, right? But I can't say like, no, I want you to be like this self-starter who's looking into this and reading that and whatever. only when somebody is ready and wants to do that are they going to. So why are we going to say it's wrong to say, hey, like, here's this program, just start it. And I always try to talk to people about, okay, like, we are, the client is all the way over here on one side, you're at the other side with optimal, but like, optimal is going to mean nothing if we cannot, meet that client even remotely close to where they're at. So where do you think the biggest disconnect is between coaches and clients? Like, let's actually dive into this. And is it that, or is it something even deeper than that?
I think because my brain works very, very simple, right? That kind of makes my life easier. I try not to overcomplicate anything, right? And
teach me how to do that, because I don't know. I have never lived a day where I do not overcomplicate everything.
It's kind of like yesterday when we were on the phone, we are talking about other events. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that was going on, because like maybe it's bad that I'm, so this way, but it works for me and works for the things that I'm looking to accomplish and be good at right now. So I don't carry as much stress, because I always want to know, okay, why is it happening and what's the solution, right? Those are always my two questions. Why is this happening? So why is it a problem? And how can we solve it? So the cool thing that I get to do is, I think a lot of times where people who are in my position who coach coaches, they have also removed themselves from the space where they coach clients too. So they're not in the game anymore, right? So they're coaching from, a place where they don't know about the new stuff going on, okay? So I think the biggest disconnect is simple. Coaches think that I'm going to get clients based off of how popular I am, how awesome of a workout I can write, how dope of a meal plan I can write, how many certifications I have, how many degrees I have, how many letters are behind my name. And then we're on this pursuit to do those things. Those things aren't bad. They are great. I think if that's what you do, there's a place to make that valuable, because you should be educated. You should know what you're doing. There's a lot of coaches that don't know what they're doing, and I think that that's wrong. However, the average client that I work with is a beginner, lifestyle person. They don't understand all the letters behind my name. They don't understand what my degree means. They don't know if your workout plan is better than my workout plan or not. All they truly care about is, how can you help me get to where it is that I want to be? And sometimes when a client comes in, they don't even understand what that means themselves. They think it's about a destination or a thing, when truly what I found, it's about a feeling. When you ask somebody, when somebody sits down and says, I want to lose 50 pounds, right? And you really dig into, one, why is that the number? Like, where did you get 50 pounds from? And when you really let them express why that is, and you ask the right questions, next thing you know, they're crying, and it's not about the 50 pounds. It's about what they aren't able to do now and what they want to be able to do 50 pounds lighter, and how they feel like life is going to be different at that point. Whether it's 50 pounds or 20 pounds, all they want to be is there and feel how they want to feel then. What happens is, coaches, we don't have that conversation, or we don't have it deep enough that it needs to be had in the beginning. So now when the client stops checking in, right, we're using all of this old, you can do it, you don't want it bad enough, I want you to win, and there's no emotion from the client's end tied to that. They're perfectly okay with saying, I'm done with this. But when I sat down with you in the beginning and I tapped into the emotional reason for you wanting to do this, now when you stop checking in, I can pull on that and ask you, is that no longer important? Ms. Jones, you told me in the beginning that it was embarrassing for you not to be able to keep up with your kids right now. And when all the other parents are doing it and you're sitting on the sideline because you're out of breath, you said that made you so sad. Is that not the case anymore? That's what's going to keep her going, because that's meaningful to her. Me saying, come on, you got to do these push-ups. She doesn't care about the push-ups. She cares about what the push-ups can do to potentially help her feel how she wants to feel when she's out there running around with her kids. She's embarrassed now. She doesn't want to be. How do we bridge that gap? So to answer the question, the disconnect is, coaches know how to help people lose the weight. I think a lot of times where we drop the ball at is we don't fill in the gaps in between to get them there. And once they stop doing the thing, we're okay with saying, Ms. Jones didn't want it bad enough, right? Well, truth is, if she knew how to do this thing already, she wouldn't need you, right? So I think, from my opinion, that would be the disconnect where we're in a race to get more educated and certified, but we can't use it because we can't get Ms. Jones to do the thing, right? And the thing is based off of an emotion.
And that's where the behavior change comes in. And that's where actually understanding and communicating with your client is so important. And I think that people get stuck in that trap of either more with letters, degrees, this, that, whatever, or it's only what I look like, right? If I look better, if I do this, if I get this accolade, that's going to get more clients. And to some degree, of course, there are going to be people who are going to hire there are going to be people who hire coaches because they have multiple degrees and they have multiple certifications and they're specialized in this. Certainly. There's also going to be clients who hire coaches because of the way solely that coach looks. Those two things are very, very true. Mm-hmm. However, the majority of people, I think, like you said, fall into this category where maybe they have tried that before and maybe it worked out great. Maybe the person who has all the degrees and has a banging body, all this stuff, like they could be amazing coaches and they have a great experience. But there's also times where that isn't necessarily true, right? And we get to the place where it's like, all right, maybe the person looks great, but they're not a good coach. It's always like that thing, like the best athletes are rarely the best coaches and then vice versa. The best coaches are rarely the best athletes. And 100%. Not to say that there's not great people, there are unicorns, right? But, and just to say, like, also people who have multiple degrees and certifications, like sometimes they are amazing coaches, but sometimes they hold themselves back because they're just spouting out information and not understanding that, like you said, emotional component and that behavior change component. So if we can, for the coaches listening, if you can start to understand that, and really, you said it perfectly, it's not about you, it's about them. If we can view everything from their perspective, then we can actually start to help people. And then for the client, we're able to now reel them back in whenever they do, fall off, because no matter how great your program is, or no matter how motivated a client is, or whatever is happening, there's going to be times where somebody falls off. And that's why, we talk a lot about as a team, like developing the right habits and having a flexible mindset and all of this, because life is not perfect. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. And if you think that it does, and if you're not prepared for challenges, you're never going to, be successful, and you're always going to fall off. And then that's when, of course, the coach could say something like, oh, well, they just weren't motivated. And I think that, we took a step forward in the industry when people were like, when people used to fall off plan, the response was always like, oh, well, you should have just done it. Or like, why did you do this? And like very like a scolding and like demeaning type of approach, which obviously doesn't work. And then we kind of moved to like, well, it's okay. Okay, now what? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm glad. I appreciate that it's okay. I appreciate that, like, if you're the client, okay, I appreciate that you're not yelling at me, but like, what am I going to do now? Right. And actually being able to figure out, okay, what are the tools that are needed to be successful here? And really breaking that down in a way that is appropriate for each individual client. And like we talked about, some people are going to not really give two fucks. They're going to be like, hey, just kind of tell me what to do. Like, I don't know any of this stuff. I just kind of want to know a little bit. I want to know enough to get me through here. And other people are going to want to know the exact mechanism behind something and why you're making those changes and why this, why that. And then you have to, as the coach, you have to be able to explain, okay, well, this is why I'm doing it. And this also might just be a feeling. And this is kind of where we're going here. So I think that just open dialogue and really being able to determine, okay, what is the appropriate language to use with the client is the most important thing. Because otherwise, if you're just talking at someone, they're never going to make changes, whether that's talking underneath their level or above their level. Like, both of those things are true, right? Like, you can't just talk at someone and expect them to be like, to make any changes.
Yeah. And I think you said it perfectly, because you have to bridge the gap between the two areas, right? It can't just be, that's okay, but it can't be you suck for not doing it either, right? Yeah. So I was on another call where we were talking about an obligation as a coach. I have to be able to create conversation with my people in order to solve the problem. Just had a client come back from vacation. So before going on vacation, I told her, this is a lifestyle. You're not, I don't train competitors who are doing shows. I think it would be different if that was the case, but you're just living a lifestyle where you're trying to learn how to create healthy habits. You go on vacation. I'd like you to focus on protein while you're there. I'd like you to focus on water, and I'd like you to not get too out of control. I want you to enjoy yourself though. Well, things got a little bit too out of control. So when she got back from vacation, we had to help her understand, hey, it's over with now. So it's okay from that standpoint, meaning it's okay. Like, I don't want you dwelling on it to the point where now you're in the dumps for 2 more weeks, still going down, that rabbit hole. I want to talk about why it happened. What did you learn from it? And then how do we prevent it from getting to that level next time? But now the goal is to get back on track as fast as possible, right? It can't just be that's okay and move on, right? I think as coaches, we have an obligation to have conversation, and that's where the true coaching is, right? And it's case by case.
And that's what I always try to say. Coaching is not like a program is one thing. I can send you a program. That's one aspect. And that's a great, again, that can be exactly what somebody needs. And that's another thing that I have evolved with my thinking, right? Before it used to be like, well, there's no point in that. Yeah, there is a point in that. Like, a lot of people could just do really well if you're like, hey, here's something that you can follow. Okay, great. That's going to get you a really good kickstart. Okay, you want more than that? Okay, that's what coaching is. And coaching is this dialogue, right? And everybody does it in a different format, right? It could be in person. It could be live calls. It could be weekly email, whatever it is for you as an individual. But that's what coaching is. Coaching is not just a program. It's, hey, here's a program, but we may make adjustments. We might not make adjustments. But the real magic of this is figuring out where you were struggling, why you were struggling. What is the motivation behind this? Why did this happen the last 6 times that you went here, right? Or why does this happen every vacation that you go on? We can't just say, okay, it happened. It is in the past, but let's assess what happened before, the first time that you went off the rails here. You know what I mean? Like, what did you do earlier that day? Oh, well, you were trying to save up for dinner, so you didn't really eat earlier, and then you slammed 3 drinks at the pool, and then all hell broke loose at dinner. Well, could have probably figured out that was going to happen. So we got to say, okay, hey, let's not do that. Like, I understand the intentions, especially when you know that you're going to have a larger meal, but I find that that's literally the number one way to overeat is if you're planning to have a large meal later, to not eat anything earlier in the day. And this is actually one of the most common things we see with clients who have binging problems is they undereat chronically earlier, and then they overeat. And then because they wake up full, they don't eat, and then they get overly hungry, and then they overeat again. So it's like it becomes a cycle, and that happens so much. Not even from a true, obviously, binge eating disorders is different, but from an overeating perspective, like on a vacation or holidays or whatever it is, you're trying to say, "Oh, I'm going to save up." And no, I'm not saying to overeat earlier in the day either, but we do need to make sure that there's some food ingested, and definitely, of course, protein and water and all those things. So, but to get back to that situation, it's like that's where that dialogue comes in. Okay, this happened, we need to move forward, but what can we do about it so that this doesn't happen again? Because it's not just going to be at the vacation. It's going to be at the holiday party or the birthday dinner or whatever. There's going to be another event where you're in the same exact situation. How do we not get back to this place?
Yeah. And I think just listening to how you broke that down, I can tell that it's something you see all the time, right? It's something that I see all the time. And I think what I see with the coaches that I coach, it's when we see something all the time, we almost get used to it to the point where now when we see it, we're telling them what happened. And what I found very beneficial is to let them tell me why it broke down. Let them tell me how it all happened, because now it's more of a learning opportunity for them. Once I'm telling them, okay, what happened was when you woke up, you didn't eat. So now, right? So once I let them tell, it's a different type of learning experience on their end. And I think that's also coaching, because most of the time as coaches, we know what happened and we're eager to do this. But I think that's where carefully listening comes in. And it's like, okay, letting them lead you to it so that they actually learn from it.
And even, think about how many times just in general, whether we're talking about this or just kind of any conversation, when you start to say things out loud, you actually articulate it in a very different way, right? Or writing it down, whatever it might be, getting those thoughts out of your head, because you could say, hey, this situation happened, and you're just replaying over and over again, but you're not really sure why. Then you're just very frustrated. When you start to say it out loud, that actually allows the client to be like, oh, wait, now I actually see it. And you're like, you as the coach might know, you're like, I know exactly, probably to a pretty close degree, I probably know what you did, unless it was like some real crazy shit that this is the first time that I'm hearing this, which it could be, because there's always those situations where you're like, I was not expecting that. But it's important to not only actively listen, because that obviously is important so that the person feels heard, but more importantly too, so that they can work through that themselves. And then it's kind of like that light bulb moment, because that's, again, the difference of talking at someone or allowing them to come to this conclusion themselves. And then you can kind of guide and help and shape the direction, because they could be like, oh, wait, now I figured it out. Okay, now what do I do? And then that's when you can provide a tentative solution.
This is how I know you're a great coach, though. And like when you ask me what's the disconnect, I wish I can give you some earth-shattering information that's the disconnect. But just as casually as you just said, well, you have to actively listen. That is something that I'm consistently going back and forth with coaches about, like that topic, the difference between listening and carefully listening, right? It's like, I gave this example to a coach that I'm working with this week. I said, listen, have you ever been on the phone with somebody? And it could be a fun conversation with a good friend of yours, but you can tell that that person is just simply waiting for their opportunity to talk. So the conversation might have been fun because it's your boy, you caught up and, it's very casual, but it wasn't meaningful. And I think we do that with clients sometimes, where we let them say whatever because we're waiting to do this and tell them. And I think carefully listening would allow us to solve a lot of problems, because we've seen a lot, but sometimes it's the little details in that specific situation that you'll only find out by doing this instead of that. So when you say what's the disconnect, it's little stuff like that, and I can tell you're good at it because how casually you said it, but that's the thing I'm consistently going over with coaches that I help.
And that takes practice, right? That takes practice as an individual. I could say, honestly, 10 years ago, I was not an active listener by any means, right? And part of it is because I am very talkative, right? And it's not so that I'm trying to be rude. I'm just somebody who's talk. I can talk about anything, to anybody, to anywhere. Like, me. I just, and it was not ever a rude thing. It was just like, it's not that I was trying not to listen. I was just always talking, you know what I mean? Because that's just kind of how I am, very chatty. And then I had to be like, wow, okay, you need to shut the fuck up, because not only like, you're not really hearing things, right? And you're not hearing that, like you said, that little tiny, that extra sentence that they throw in, right? Because it could be the same situation. I overate on my vacation. Well, there's 100 variations of why that could have happened. And for that individual, again, this is where coaching comes in, right? Not like, hey, here's a program, follow this, do that. This is where coaching comes in. It's asking the right questions, and it's being able to listen. And that's why I think that regardless of if you're doing this in an online or an in-person capacity, it stems from giving the person the room to write those things out or to say those things. So, we do a lot of online coaching, and in our updates, there's a lot of questions that are being asked, right? And that is giving the client space to reflect. It's not just, hey, did you hear your macros this week? That's like the fucking last thing that is an important thing for a lot of people, right? Like, certainly there are times where that is the priority of what we're doing. But I can't tell you how many clients, once we've gotten past that stage, I would say the majority of the coaching is everything else, right? And we're making adjustments to targets, certainly for body comp changes or health changes or performance changes. But the real coaching is all these things. What were the barriers this week? What were some of those wins? What was your mindset with food? And just even asking that and prompting it and then allowing somebody to explain. I would never be able to know that, okay, you were adherent or you weren't adherent this week because of this other stuff. And if I was I have to look at quantitative data. I have to, but I also have to look at the qualitative data in order to know what somebody is actually experiencing and why they're doing something or why they're not doing it. So I think it's really great that that's what you're focusing on with other coaches in the space, because that really is, there is this huge disconnect. And I think that if we just had more people who were able to relate to clients and actually create real behavior change, then we would actually see a lot more sustainable results. And that's really what this is about, right? Of course, we want to work, the coaches want to work with clients. That's how you have a business, right? But at the end of the day, you want the person to be able to do this, like to have the tools to do this on their own as well. The point isn't just to say like, I'm gonna be the gatekeeper for your results forever. I've worked with some clients off and on for 5 years. It's not because my program is the best. It's because of all the other things. You know what I mean? It's not because it's not like I'm keeping them in this codependent relationship that they like can't do this on their own. It's just like, hey, there's this accountability. There's that. Like all of those things are the important components of coaching.
I think you pointed out something very important that I don't want to breeze past, because I've learned this about you specifically, right? So you talked about creating the space for people to share, right? And what happens when you do that, they end up sharing something that they didn't even realize that, was the reason, or they didn't even realize, they were going to share, but it's because you created the space to do that. So you pointed out how you've had to adjust and develop that skill because you like to talk a lot, but you understand that carefully listening is important too. And as I hear you talk about that, I think about all the conversations that we've had on like our athlete weekends, like on a bus ride that is 30 minutes, right? And I get off the bus like, how the hell did it get that deep, right? And you know what I mean? And it's like,
we like sit down and I'm like, all right, so what do you want to dive into?
You know what I mean? But that's a skill. And then with that skill, you also provide a space where people feel comfortable in sharing. Even if you are talking, you're talking a lot from a passionate place where I can tell you care about this conversation. What a lot of coaches do is, and when I say a lot, I'm that's relative, right? What coaches will do is we want to talk about ourselves, right? And that's where the problem happens, because if I'm telling you how cool I am, what's not happening is me listening to what I need to be hearing about you. So the reason conversations get so deep with us is because, while you do share, it's about the topic. It's not, you're not trying to one up me and say, oh, well, you did that. Well, this is what I did. And this is why I'm awesome. And that's why we get off the 20-minute bus ride. And I'm like, well, shit, I didn't plan on it getting that deep, but you know what I mean? Like, but that's the game. That's the skill.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've had to develop over time. And it's so funny, like people keep telling me this, like, it's just like, I don't know.
Yep.
It's just something that I guess I do. But it is, I think what's really important too, and this is another skill that I've always had, but I guess I've developed and brought it to the forefront, is to just be curious. Right. Yep. And I saw this, seems with a lot of people in my life, but, and I talk about him all the time, but Dr. Bill Campbell, my grad school advisor, who, he's just been an amazing mentor for me in so many ways he didn't even try to be, and some of them were these things, and always curious, always asking questions, and not and sometimes I know I do this to maybe like an abrasive level where I will just ask something and I don't mean it in like a way that is, I'll just say something. I'm like, oh shit, like maybe I didn't know them that well. Like I probably shouldn't have said that, and then I'll like catch myself. Right. But sometimes it's just out of a genuine curiosity, not a judgment, not a whatever. And I noticed every time I'd ever be with him or talk with him or see him with other people, always asking other people questions. Now, this is a person who has published so much research, has so much knowledge in multiple different areas, and most people should be coming to him to ask questions, you know what I mean? But he is always asking somebody else questions. Doesn't matter if it's an undergrad or a graduate student or another person or just anybody in a different field. He is always curious. And something that I saw that and I was like, wow, this is, first of all, this is how you're going to learn more, but also that does make people feel like, wow, this makes me feel good. You know what I mean? And as I started to just ask people more questions, I started to learn more. And then I was like, wow, I can use these experiences to shape my experiences and my notions of things. And that's how I adjust and update things. Because if you just stay in your own bubble and like you said, we get so like, okay, I probably know what you did on this vacation. We'll go back to that example. I probably know what you did, but let me just maintain this curiosity and actually ask you what happened. And then I might hear the same story that I've heard, or I might hear something completely new that I can now use with another client or another person, another example. And so I think that it's really important that when we are having these discussions, and this goes just for your personal life as well, is to be curious and to just simply like let conversations flow. And that's, on the personal side, I think that's just, I mean, obviously this could be a whole different rabbit hole, but I think that people, especially when it is obviously online, it's like fucking disaster to try to communicate with people, right? But when you're in person, I think that online interactions have started to shift in-person conversations, and people are worried about saying something wrong, right? And it's like, if you come from a place, like sometimes I'll say something and I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't really mean it to come out that way. Or sometimes I'll just say something and be like, what is this? And like the discussion is an exploration of that thought, right? And it's an exploration of, I might come to a different conclusion at the end of that discussion, that end of that 20-minute bus ride. And I think that sometimes people are scared to do that because they don't want to change their mind on something. And it's like, no, like, let's just have this conversation. Like, what do you think about this? Or what happened here? And then just start to explore in that conversation. And I think that is how you're able to actually expand your viewpoint on really anything but only if you allow yourself and other people allow you to do that as well, right? Like and that's where it gets really hard online, because as soon as you say something, people put you in that bucket forever. You say, oh, well, you said this once, so you must think this 5 years later. It's like, fuck, 5 years ago, like, holy shit. I mean, like, I don't remember half the shit I said 5 years ago, let alone, hopefully I'm in a different place with how I'm acting and speaking and like how I can articulate something. And I'm not saying that you have to be a whole new person every year, but you should be able to change your mind on things, and not even necessarily change your mind, but expand your mind and expand your definitions of how you feel about things. So I think that just on a personal level is really important too. And that if you are a coach, that's only going to help you with coaching as well.
It comes down to what's the goal in this current conversation, right? Like what am I looking to accomplish? Am I in this conversation to leave it with you feeling like Mike's super cool? If I enter the conversation with that intent, a lot of times it's not a meaningful conversation. What I've learned, you said it so perfectly, where you said, be curious, because it does truly allow you an opportunity to learn, right? A mentor I had when I first started in the fitness industry, he was like, dude, the number one way to get people to open up, he's like, who do you think you should get them talking about? And I'm like, I don't know. Who? He's like, dude, the most important person to them is them. He said, so get them talking about themselves. He said, even the guy who says, well, I don't like to brag, if you get him talking about his heydays when he was the man on the basketball court and what does he do right after that? He tells you all about it, right? So the person that you brought up, who is in a high esteem position, I bet the part of the reason he got there was because he was so curious, where he went into these conversations truly to learn. I'm not even here to prove to you how dope I am. I'm fucking dope, right? But I'm not here for that right now. I'm here to ask you everything about you, because when I walk away from it, I'm going to know what I need to know about you, right? I've truly learned something about you. And I think when we go back to the original topic of the disconnect, coaches will start the conversation trying to prove why you should pick me. I'm not here to prove to you why you should pick me. I'm going to listen to what your needs are. And then by the end of it, we're going to determine if we're a good fit to work together based off of what I heard from you. And a simple skill, and you did this earlier, it's, so what I heard you say is ... right? People, that is one, if coaches listening, if you could take one thing away, it's that. When we talk about carefully listening, be the person who, once Laurin tells me something, it's okay for me to say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is ... because let's use a term like tone up, right? You'll hear a client say, you'll say, well, what do you want to accomplish, Miss Jones? And I always use Miss Jones just because it's a common name. I'm sorry. But what do you want to accomplish, Miss Jones? And she's like, I want to tone up. Well, if you ask, if 5 different people told you they want to tone up and you say, well, what does tone up mean for you? You're going to get 5 different answers, right? Tone up for some people is going to be building muscle. Tone up for some people is going to be fitting into a pair of jeans and everything in between. So I can't assume that my definition of tone up and your definition of tone up is the same. So what I'm hearing is—
That's a really great point. Defining terms.
What I'm hearing when you say tone up is you want the muscles in your shoulders to look a certain way because when you wear this right now, you feel ... That's what I'm hearing you say. That's the difference. That's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about having this conversation and being so now the plan is built around that, like what you want to accomplish, and more importantly, why you want to do it.
Think about how many things get misconstrued just because we don't have, or we're not on the same page with the working definition. And we think like, oh, because we're using all of our own, preconceived ideas and biases and previous experiences because you can't go into life with everything being a new experience, right? Like you would be like a child then, right? And you would just be like, well, you have to use previous situations to tie things together. Like that's obvious. But everybody's going to have their own unique definition. And when we're talking about coaching, we have to be able to define those things. So yesterday I just did an interview. By the time this comes out, you guys, it'll already be out. So if you haven't listened to the interview with Dr. Dom D'Agostino, it was fantastic. He's known for, keto research and metabolic therapies for just a bunch of advanced diseases. And he's incredible. But we were talking about some things. We're like, let's actually define this. Like, let's define ketogenic diet. Let's put some parameters around insulin sensitivity, right? Because everybody has a different idea. Like we all think that we have the same ideas, but we really don't, And I shared an example. There was like a reel, and it was like keto recipes, and I'm like, why is this coming up on my page? I eat all the carbs, but anyways, it's talking about like first of all they had chicken breast. I'm like, bro, don't use chicken breast if you're on keto. Like save it for everybody else. Then they like had chicken breast. They like loaded it with like cheese, sour cream, butter, whatever, a whole mess of stuff, right? Bacon, the whole deal. And they cook it. And I'm thinking, okay, like I get it. And then they're like, hey, pair this with potatoes. And I'm like, I don't know if you guys know, like, ketorecipe.org, whatever. And that was not the name. So don't come after me, but like, hey, this is like not the right working definition. Like we probably shouldn't be, you know what I mean? But anyway, so I think that that's super important to clarify those things with, whenever you're starting with a client, and also not just when you're starting, but to check back in with people, right? Because things change over time. And I think that this is something that clients really struggle with, and even coaches can struggle with, is when goals change. Right. Yep. And, we've talked about this on the podcast. If you guys have listened before, like we've talked about goals changing, and that's okay. I mean, within reason, right? Like you can't change your massive goals every week. Like then you're never going to make any progress. Like we all know that. But at some point it's okay to be like, you know what? This is no longer something that I'm working towards, and I would like to work towards this. Doesn't mean that overnight you're going to completely be a different person or you're going to have reached that goal, but you can shift that. And I think that checking in consistently, or at least offering that space where the client knows they can come to you and say those things, that's really important. Because otherwise they're like, well, I'm really locked into this thing because that's what we talked about 3 months ago. I'm not really feeling it right now. And then they can, bring it up to you, and you can either say, hey, this new goal is not going to be realistic because of if the new goal is, well, I want to drop, 20 pounds in the next month, even though I've already been dieting for 6 months. You're like, well, that's a great goal, but probably not going to be able to do that. So, but hey, let's readjust some of these other things that we're doing. Let's revisit this. Let's change that. Can we adjust here? So I think that it's important to be able to even just to not only do that in the beginning, but to also give that space so that people can change that and adjust that definition and those goals throughout the process.
And I think none of the stuff like was so awesome about the things that we're talking about for coaches that are listening. None of the stuff is rocket science over the top stuff. None of it. We haven't said anything that's hard to digest. But when I'm coaching coaches, I always say, don't approach what you're hearing from the I already know this standpoint. The question is, how well am I doing it consistently at a high level? Because what you just said is a no-brainer. You should not only talk about these things in the beginning, but you should understand that things change and they adjust. So you should check back in. But you'd be surprised at how many coaches don't. Like, it's summertime right now. So the conversation with, or it's approaching, and the conversation that I'm having
here.
Well,
balls.
like they're just getting into the summer activities and that type of thing. And I was talking to one of my coaches this week, and he was talking about, we were talking about, keeping your people engaged throughout the summer. And the reality of it is one of his clients signed up to get ready for the summer. Summer is here. Did you not check back with her, right? Did you not take the time to say, like, whether we successfully got to where we wanted to be or whether we didn't, bro, a conversation should be being had right now, because guess where we are? Summer. And he's like, oh shit, I got to do that. And he's a great coach, but these are the things that I'm coaching on. It's not rocket science things. It's how the success are in these weird little details.
And that is the magic. That is the art of coaching. And I always say that there is a science to coaching and there is an art, and that art form takes a lot of humility to develop. It takes time, it takes experiences. Nobody's expecting anybody who's first starting to know this. And also for the client, I think that it can be very scary or overwhelming, especially if they've had a bad experience before where they weren't able to communicate with the coach effectively. I think that it's important to, obviously create a space where they feel like they can discuss this, but recognize that some clients are going to maybe be slower to opening up than others because of past experiences. And you have to understand that as well. I did just want to provide a resource for you guys. It's a book that I read for a project that I was actually working on. So it's a really, really great book. If you guys have heard about motivational interviewing, it's typically used in the more, psychological space, but there was actually a book, Motivational Interviewing in Nutrition and Fitness. The authors are Clifford and Curtis. It was published in 2016. So it's a really great resource. And my friend Chanel recommended it. And then I finally got around to reading it, and it was just a really awesome book. And sometimes it's nice when you maybe intuitively have started to do things, but you can put a name to it, right? So I think you'd really like the book if you haven't read it. And it was one of these things that, again, it just opened my eyes to some different methods, but also, again, put a name to certain things that was really useful. So I think this was a really great discussion. I think that we gave a lot of great talking points for both coaches and clients, which was certainly the goal. And do you have anything else to add to that?
I think we nailed it. If I do say myself,
yeah. Oh, one thing I did want to add, and I think this was to wrap this up. Remember how you were talking about, you don't want to leave if you go into a conversation with let me tell somebody how awesome I am, or let me impress them, or let me whatever, right? And whether this is, again, personal life, or this is for the, the coach who's trying to sign a client or whatever, rarely does somebody come away and say that, right? Whereas the person who is actually listening or asking questions, Dr. Campbell's never once, acted a certain way. And I'm using him as an example here. And I use him as an example all the time. And I think that anybody who's ever met him would say the same thing, right? Nobody comes away after talking with him and it's he was really trying to show off, or he was really trying to show me what he knew. Nope. He was asking questions. He was genuinely curious. He wanted to learn from you. And I would say that almost every single person would say that. So I think actually, and then when you say that, you're like, man, it's a really awesome person. So I think that actually doing the opposite of what we think we need to be doing, right? Like somebody's coming to you, like you said, you don't necessarily need to prove yourself. If they ask you questions about, what's your background, what have you done? Of course, share those things. You can weave that into the conversation, but it shouldn't be about that. It should be about them. And then people are going to say, like, ironically, when you are just listening, people are going to just say how great of a conversation that was, even though you weren't trying to make that the priority of the conversation. So I did want to just wrap that up because I thought that was a really great point. So where can people find you? I know you are, obviously, I know I talked at the beginning, PT Boss is your Instagram. So is it the, or is it just, I can't remember.
Yeah, you making the mistake that everybody else makes is the PT.
Sorry. Whoa.
Yeah, the PT Boss. So no, the two main social media platforms I'm on right now is Instagram is at the PT Boss, and then TikTok is at the PT Boss Official. So those are the two main places I'm hanging out at right now.
Nice. All right. Well, we will put those in the show notes, everybody, to find you. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it. This is the best way to support our show. For more information on one-on-one coaching, you can visit teamlocofit.com and make sure to join our email list for great information and also to be first to hear about the app we'll be releasing in a few months. So we will talk to you guys next week.